Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host from Sprinklr. I'm so glad that you took the time just after lunch, just for the end of the day, if you're on the East Coast, to come and join us at the third episode of the Sprinklr Coffee Club. We've got a great show with you today. You may recall, if you've seen the two previous episodes, that we have had two of the world's leading experts outside of Sprinklr, Rachel Hoppy in community management, Amber Naz in content marketing. One in which I decided to bring one of Sprinklr's own teammates into the team, into the show. And I'd like to introduce our special guest today. And if you'll forgive me for waxing just a touch poetic, I mean it when I say, when you think about the marketing leader of the future and what all of us aspire to be, I think you can imagine someone who can work really well with data and tell great stories, someone who can connect with customers, who can connect with partners, who can connect with developers and product organizations, someone that can walk into the room and light it up with energy and insights. And in that, that's exactly what you'll find in today's guest, my teammate, Justin Garrity from Sprinklr. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So glad to have you. So,
yeah.
Justin, I decided to ask you to come on to the show today after you participated in a public conversation on Twitter when we were talking about, myself and a thought leader out in the market, we're talking about user personas and stories, and how you figure out how to really get into the hearts and minds of your customers. And here at Sprinklr, our mission is to help every organization in the world make their customers happier. But in order to do that, we need to know what our customers really, truly want and need. And that's easier said than done.
Yep. Yeah. So it was an interesting conversation that we got involved in. I think there's a lot of methodologies that are out there that people use. I think people are familiar with like use cases and personas, and those are often talked about, used like how to essentially define and get a product team and a design team the information you need to go about and kind of make improvements to software. These are these mechanisms of ways to capture that information and kind of carry it along. And what we got involved in is this research angle of what methodologies really work effectively there. And I feel like use cases are really good to kind of define why you're doing something or give a high level. But I really believe in scenario-led, what I call scenario-led product development. And that's a little bit more specific and a little bit more story-driven than use cases.
That's fantastic. If I can interrupt, I want to make sure that our viewers know today that this is something that you are coming at in part from a product angle, but it's also really applicable to marketers.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage folks that are listening and watching today to jump in with your questions and comments and feedback live wherever you're watching the show. We've got the technology to pick it up, and as best we can, we'll work your questions, viewers, into this conversation about this really unique model that Justin has put together that I find inspiring. I think you'll find inspiring too as you dig in and seek to learn what your customers really want and need. So Justin, tell us a little bit about this model.
Yeah, it basically combines 4 different methodologies that I've learned from 4 very different sources and puts them together and creates a framework. So the 4 sources are Carolyn Snyder with paper prototyping, Indy Young with mental models, L.U. Goldratt with theory of constraints, and Clayton Christensen with jobs to be done. So these are the 4 methodologies that each of these authors and practitioners have developed some pretty amazing techniques in each of those areas. And this is a way to combine those 4 together to create scenario-led product development.
That's fantastic. I love a good model. It's such a powerful tool. And this one, having that kind of set of constituent ingredients from such respected thinkers is just all the more powerful.
Yeah, and I think this started. I've been doing product development now for almost 20 years in software, and one of the first techniques that I read about paper prototyping from Caroline Schneider, I read an article posted on an IBM forum, and then bought her book, and was just amazed at this methodology. And it basically has you get away from your computers, break out some paper, pencils, Sharpies, and tape and scissors, and build a computer interface, or what you eventually want to essentially design and develop in software, all on paper. And then using that paper model of the interface, test how it works intuitively with users. So you can bring this paper version of your interface to users and test to see how intuitive it is.
And presumably that could be a product or a website that you want people to navigate through and learn about your company or product as well.
That's right. And it's just so brilliant in its simplicity, because a couple of key things. One is you always do it with two users that are testing at the same time, and that way you can hear their inner dialogue with each other as they try to agree on a course of action, so you don't have to interrupt them. But also, because it's all on paper, they don't believe that you're testing their computer skills, which oftentimes can get in the way of testing an interface. So they're very unguarded, and they're more frank, and they really show you kind of what they're thinking. And once you go through that scenario and you see where they stumbled, you can redesign, and then you bring in your next users, and you keep doing that iteratively until you have a very intuitive workflow. The challenge that I ran into was I believed in this so much that everywhere I went, and people that have worked with me before will say, yeah, Justin Garrity, paper prototyping guy, is that it's very hard to rally a team to go do this exercise. It takes a lot of effort. You have to kind of set aside time. There's a time, it takes time to put it all together and then get the users and go explore this with. So a lot of times in product development, you're trying to work faster than that. And that's where the next part of the methodology came from. Is I took the scenario part of paper prototyping. So forget the paper prototyping part of paper prototyping, but take the scenario type. I found it to be very effective to test what you're actually testing for, because the scenarios, you have to explain those to the users that are trying the paper interface to try to go do these tasks. And that format of scenarios was really key. So that's what I extracted from paper. Still a great methodology, great for some cases, but you can take the scenario side of that, take it out, and then apply it almost to all kinds of projects.
So when you're doing paper prototyping, you're like taking a piece of paper, taking some scissors, and cutting out different parts of the interface and putting them in different places in a mock website,
or app,
and then you're moving them around in between people who are testing them.
Yeah, to test them, you are reading scenarios. So you're not asking, what do you think of this interface, or what do you think of this design? You're just asking them to complete a task or a series of tasks, which are the scenarios. And in paper prototyping, in the book and Caroline Schneider's guidance, she never really kind of spent too much time on how to develop the scenarios. It was more on the process of the testing. So that's where there was kind of interesting, like, how do you come up with the scenarios? And that's what led to the next methodologies. So what I like about the scenarios is you can test any interface, whether it's paper or not, and run through that as a real world use case. So how do you get real world scenarios to test with? And the next is, I was at South by Southwest years ago, and Indy Young was speaking about mental models. And this is a way to essentially, two parts of this that really stood out to me was how to interview users and how to capture the results of that interview into a model that you can then work from. So the technique that she gave, and this is a very simple explanation, she has two books, Mental Models and then her follow-up, Practical Empathy. Practical Empathy really dives into this interview process and how to really understand what the user is trying to accomplish. But the methodology in the simplest form is you interview users not asking for what features are important to them, but you ask them how they do their job and how they get this done, and almost as if you're a newspaper reporter writing a story about them. And it leads to this like celebration and fascination with this user in a way where they get to talk about all the great things they're doing in their job, and you have a chance to explore these scenarios that might have escaped you if you're just laser focused on what features you wanted to bring.
Mm-hmm. What are some examples?
A lot of times when I'm interviewing users, it'll be some kind of conversation like, tell me about like how your day starts. Like, what's the first thing you do when you wake up? Do you check your phone for work, like email or Slack? And they'll laugh and they're like, yeah, that's exactly how I start. And I'm like, what do you check for? And then they'll walk through that. And then through that exploration of how they start their day, they get to talk about how hard their job is, like what the expectations are, what the goals are, all these different areas that they start talking about that might not be revealed if you're just hunting down what features we need to improve and how do we get to these very specific use cases. You really explore that user's perspective, how they see the world, how they try to go through their day, and how they use the tools to essentially get this done.
Okay, yep. And I know I've seen some of your data visualization work and your dashboards, and you've done some lots of web stuff as well. And so, what's an example of what a scenario might look like from the perspective of someone that you're trying to serve up information to in a way that serves them well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think let's get there in just a second, but the next part of the practice from Indiana was to create the mental model, and that essentially is to take these tasks that you essentially collect through the interview process and diagram them out from a left to right workflow of how they start their whole project or task, and then how they end up. And you can basically organize them by almost like categories or steps along the way. And it creates this really interesting diagram of these vertical stacks of all the different tasks in the different sequence of how they get their job done. And so scenario would be something like, let's say we were ordering pizza online. I think a scenario example I used the other day in a test was just for training purposes. Was your dad, you've got lots of kids, you're on your own, taking care of the kids, you're in a panic, you gotta order food, so you have to order pizza, and you have to figure out how to order the right pizza for your, let's say, 4 kids. And one of them likes cheese, and the other 3 like pepperoni. So you decide to order 2 pizzas, 1 full pepperoni, 1 half pepperoni, 1 half cheese. These are the kind of scenarios you can basically capture to then go test a pizza ordering app to see if you can get through this sequence. And the fact that the dad is in a hurry and a little bit of a panic also helps create this tension in the scenario side of it. I'm in a hurry and it can't be too complicated and you can get through this pretty. So that's a good example of that. Where the challenge led to next was, well, how do you then interview somebody? What's the framework? And initially it was trying to figure out how to improve, let's say, a product or a very specific way of looking at things. And then I was exposed to Jobs to Be Done from Clayton Christensen. And this was, if anyone's ever read him or studied him, he has a classic milkshake example with McDonald's. And we'll put a link in after this show so you can watch that video. But it's an amazing kind of insight that sometimes what a person hires a product to do is not what the people that designed the product originally thought that product was going to do, or they might be using the product in some pretty creative ways that are outside of the initial intent. And it's up to you to kind of capture that market opportunity and to see that and develop towards those ways in which your customers are hiring your product. And that led to a realization that when you interview users, if what you're trying to do is frame everything is what is the job that they're trying to do. So that is the goal of the interview, is to understand that perspective while you're trying to figure out what these different tasks are. And by doing that, you leave no task or sequence unturned. So rather than just focusing on your own platform or product, you see how they use your product to get a job done. And when they divert and use other products or other creative methods they figured out as users to solve the problem they are expected to during the day, and when they kind of go off your product and back into your product and off your product and back into your product, and what are those creative ways that they have figured out how to do? So that's now what you can capture through this mental model is everything they're using within your product, but also in all these other creative ways that they figured out how to do this job.
And what do you do with that information when people diverge, for example, from using the product when you step outside and use something else?
Yeah, there's a couple of key things that one is that I find that users, and this whole thing is about interviewing users, not customers, and that's a key difference. We have other people at Sprinklr that interview customers. Interviewing users are the people that are asked to use the software. Maybe somebody else purchased it for them. We deal with a lot of enterprise customers at Sprinklr. So a lot of times they're not the ones that necessarily selected your software. Sometimes they were just informed this is what we're using. So they have a job to get done, and they will use your software, but anytime it gets in their way where maybe it slows them down or they have to be creative to solve some gap that maybe your software isn't covering that is part of their job, they either use another piece of software, which is sometimes great, and that's an integration opportunity, or they use like a notepad off to the side to capture just notes to make your software work because you don't have a place to capture that information. And so they're using a lot of creative methodologies and spreadsheets and documents to essentially go store this information and then bring that back in at other later part of the workflow in your software. And those are the opportunities where you really see like, wow, we have a lot of users that are going outside of our software to capture this information, and then they're bringing that back in later in the workflow. And that's the opportunity for the product team to essentially increase the productivity of the user by bringing that functionality back into the software.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can't help but think that this step-by-step jobs to be done understanding is incredibly empowering for marketers as well, knowing how to really relate to the people that they are seeking to connect with.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get trapped in this very linear communication back and forth of our customers are using this software or they're working with our services to do the thing that we've already been communicating, and that's the way we have trained each other to communicate back and forth. But taking a step back and doing an interview like this, understanding what else they do during the day and how much they have to get done, and when they use your software and when they don't, is eye-opening, one. But two, you really discover some of the most creative people in the world because users have to get their job done. That's the whole thing. If they have a productivity and a job to be done, pressure on them in their role. And to see the creativity that people employ to essentially figure out how to get their job done is inspiring. And it's what leads to, I think, some breakthrough concepts.
Yeah, right on, right on. If you were here watching Justin Garrity and I discuss this model that he has assembled through his experience working with many of the biggest brands in the world, if you've got questions or thoughts, anything you'd like to ask Justin to drill down into deeper, please let us know in comments and we will do that. So Justin, we've got paper prototyping, which largely inspired the scenario.
That's right.
Basis.
So rather than asking, do you like this interface or do you like this application, you can actually ask users or even internal QA or developers or designers, do these tasks, do these scenarios.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, and then specifically, you're finding it powerful to do those scenario interviews based on determining what jobs to be done there are for the user.
Yes, what they're trying to get done during their day, what software and what services they're hiring to do those jobs.
And then the workflows that you're observing for the way that they are interacting with your work, your product, your content, whatever the case may be, in order to get their job done. Those deer paths or workflows, essentially, you're abstracting into mental models.
Yeah, it's a mental model with a capital M, two capital M's. It's Indy Young's name for this. Sometimes when you tell people mental model, they just think some kind of diagram, or they think of it more of like any model will do. But there's a specific format. The only thing that changed from her format that she uses is there is a way to have a baseline, which is the left to right path, and below, traditionally she put down the motivations behind the task, and I've not captured that because I found it to be useful to put the task down there when they don't use your software but use other software, or they use their own creative tools outside of your offering. so that you can kind of see where they're using other software, where they're using your software, and how the integration works together. Yes, that's the mental model to capture that.
Great. So we've got a question from the audience. A viewer would like to know if you have any examples you can offer us of unintended or surprising product uses that later became a feature.
Yeah, for sure. So one we were just working on with the product that I run. It's a data visualization software, and we had a user that needed to make it change. We have a remote control where you can change what's on the screen using your phone, but they needed it to change in the morning before they got to work. So what they did is they bought another license of our software just to have a fake user be available to essentially push a virtual button to change the software on the screen. And that essentially is a great opportunity to bring in a feature of scheduling, which we're working on right now in the product, so that a user doesn't have to pay for another seat. They can just essentially schedule that to. It's a simple idea, but it was amazing that the creative solution was it to buy a fake user seat just to have this other user be available for this machine to push a button to make it go live at a certain time.
That's amazing.
And if we hadn't explored and asked the right questions to kind of see kind of how they're using the product and back up and like how do you start your day and get into that, we wouldn't have discovered that potentially.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Okay, so once you've got these understandings of your audience, of your users, can you tell us a little bit more about the most effective ways to make use of them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. What works for other teams is not the models. I've tried that before. People that aren't part of creating the models sometimes have a hard time adapting to them and understanding what they're saying. But the scenarios are great. Scenarios really have a life of their own that can be attached to JIRA tickets, attached to design exercises, even to QA. And that's when you think about like how your QA team tests your software to see if it's working after a feature's been developed. Having the scenarios available to the QA team to essentially be in the role to role play that type of user, the dad that's trying to order the pizza, is a great way to test whether or not you were able to develop the solution in the right way. And the nice thing about scenarios too is, unlike use cases, which a lot of times will be more happy path, like this is what the intended flow is, and then here's some exceptions like in a bullet list or something off to the side or variations. You can write the variations into the scenario. So I could have another user that is not a dad with kids, but let's say a guy or gal that's like throwing a party needs to order like 20 pizzas and is going to go pick them up and not for delivery. And that's a totally different scenario, but testing the same application. So you can kind of test at it from different angles. And scenarios you can write in normal things that you discover in the interview process that people do that a lot of times don't get captured. So you could say, dad puts in the wrong address, has to back up and put the right one in because it was associated with the wrong credit card. Like weird things that a lot of times don't get discovered until after a product is released, that are just normal human behavior of starting over, rethinking something, backing up in the workflow. Those can all be in the scenarios.
Mm-hmm. So much of this reminds me of a theme that we've been hearing from several of our guests here at Coffee Club about the incredible power of directly engaging with your customers or your users and using that to capture knowledge and insights that can deliver value on an ongoing basis. Last week, Amber Naslund talked about how important it is for marketers to go and visit customers on site with sales team members so they could hear what kinds of questions or objections were raised in a conversation, and then create marketing assets that would help fulfill that educational role ahead of time so that the salespeople were then able to be the kind of consultative advisors that they aspire to be instead of spending time doing that basic education.
Yeah, I think there's something about watching someone work or watching to see how they do their job or seeing that in person is a completely different experience than, let's say, communicate through a PowerPoint or through an email or something like that. You just don't understand sometimes the decisions they have to make, and also where the steps are where they hesitate or where things slow down. And that's where the last methodology we didn't talk about, but it is the the theory of constraints. And that comes from actually manufacturing, but I love when it applies to workflow. But that is where in the workflow does inventory build up? When a user all of a sudden, it looks like one task, but then you find out that task is a 4-hour task. That led to another innovation recently in Sprinklr. Is we were interviewing with different users and we found out that they used Sprinklr, they used it for different purposes, let's say to build and manage campaigns. And at the end of the campaign, they had to essentially present the findings, like how did the campaign go? And although there's all these great dashboards, it's easier to communicate something like that through, let's say, a PowerPoint. And what we found is that users were spending like 4 hours building a PowerPoint after every single campaign. So that led to the innovation of our new product presentations, which takes our live slide technology from display and puts it into like a presentation format. And our goal there is to cut 4 hours down to, let's say, 15 minutes or less. And although that just looks like one task, that is a saving of 4 hours in one day for one user. That is a massive productivity.
What is it? What does the name theory of constraints mean in that context? What's
the constraint is when inventory, and here, let's say work gets built up at a certain stage, and then it's waiting for the bottleneck to finish that task before it can move on to the workflow. So when you think of a factory, it's a little easier because you think of like bottles moving through a bottling facility, and all of a sudden they all get stacked up and they're all waiting for the one machine to cap the bottles. And if that was really slow, that essentially gates the throughput of the entire factory of that machine. So if you think about this scenario, how many campaigns can we do as a team? Well, however many people can make PowerPoints at the end is kind of our gating factor. Mm-hmm. So if you find the areas where there are huge buildups, where something takes a long time to do, it's captured as a single task, that is a massive opportunity for improvement to bring back productivity to your users.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds like the kind of practice that you could get big immediate benefits from. We got a last question from the audience here. One of our viewers asks how long we should expect for it to take to master some of these skills, say the paper prototyping or the scenario research.
It's a good question. I'm trying to capture this in a way where it's easy to disseminate, but I have books, and we'll put links to these books after this episode that people can read and see these 4 different techniques. I just gave a workshop on paper prototyping the other day that took less than an hour, and it was really fun. And it was the pizza ordering example, and so I don't know, but right now what we just did is we just hired a user research team at Sprinklr that I'm now leading based on these techniques. They just started a few weeks ago. So before that, it was myself and Ryan in design, practicing some of these, and now we're able to have dedicated user researchers, and they're going to be capturing user interviews and creating models and creating scenarios for our product team. And so we're so excited, and I'll find out after training them how long it takes.
Yeah,
I'll get back to you.
Well, congratulations on expanding your responsibilities all the further in your team. And what awesome jobs it sounds like those folks have got in front of them.
Yeah, they're pretty excited. There's a lot of fun. I think there's an element of scenario development that's like writing a script in a movie. You write it as if an actor is coming along, and they're going to read these scenarios and be able to role play as that user. So it's a really great shortcut to essentially role play to test the design.
That's fantastic. And the end result, I'm sure, will be markedly happier customers and users.
Yeah, the goal of all of this for me is productivity. So what we're trying to do is reduce the barriers to productivity. Either increase what you can do in a day, or need less time to get that done. Kind of the same equation. And because Sprinklr is an integrated platform, we integrate with a lot of other partners. A lot of it is we see a lot of challenges too, wherever the integration points are. How can we make those something where we don't lose productivity. So when a user has to use multiple systems, let's say they're moving from Sprinklr, then are integrating with another platform, how can we make sure that the barrier there isn't too high and that the productivity isn't lost through that integration?
Oh, it's exciting to think about. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time for today's Coffee Club. This is a conversation that we could have much longer, and I look forward to talking to you about it in general. And it's such a pleasure to get to hear about this work that you're doing and the job that you have created for yourself and you've created for others. What a great job to be done.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's very good.
That's fantastic.
Thanks,
Well,
Marshall.
I really appreciate everybody joining us today in this episode of the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Stay tuned. Come back. Join us next week on the 18th of July. We will have as a special guest Leslie Poston. Leslie is a longtime McKinsey content marketing consultant who is now creating trailblazing, award-winning, fantastic content at the intersection of something really exciting, artificial intelligence, and something really hard to understand in some senses, that being industrial Internet of Things. She's at a company now called Noodle.ai and creating great marketing content there in a deep, complex B2B context. So I look forward to having a conversation over some coffee with Leslie next week. But I want to thank Justin again and thank all of you for coming and joining us and asking questions in the chat. We really appreciate your time and engagement. And we wish you the best of luck in the coming week, helping to make your customers happier. And we hope you'll join us next time.